Being country music fans, my parents and I had decided to take a spring road trip from Wisconsin to Nashville, Tennessee. It was a nice break from work, and after a long winter, the warmer weather was most appreciated. As we made our way south through the Smoky Mountains, the dogwood trees along the interstate were all in bloom. We'd stopped to tour Mammoth Cave, and then planned to visit the Grand Ole Opry, Opryland amusement park, and to take a cruise down the Cumberland River on the General Jackson showboat. On one morning at our Nashville hotel, we'd awoken to some unexpected rainy weather, and were looking for something to do before the forecasted sunshine had arrived. In a hotel lobby display rack, I came across a brochure for a place called the Hermitage. The strange name of this attraction had caught my eye, and looking over the brochure, I discovered the Hermitage to be the name that President Andrew Jackson had given to his cotton plantation, located just east of Nashville. Now a National Historic Landmark, the Hermitage is where Old Hickory had lived throughout most of his adult life, and until his death in 1845. It appeared to be fairly close to the city, and possibly an interesting place to ride out the rain. After completing the guided tour of the mansion itself, we exited a rear door to explore the grounds. Strolling down to a path that led to the gardens, we were greeted by sunshine as the rain had subsided. As we walked on the path, I was surveying the various farm buildings and thinking about all of the work and activity that must have been going on back in the time Old Hickory. Looking over to my left, I saw a long rectangular hewn log building, where a young black woman leaning peacefully against one of its longer sides, wearing a full-length off-white dress and apron. She appeared to be taking a rest from her work. What I immediately noticed was that there was something about her that seemed almost photographically serene and beautiful. Though the clothing she wore was simple and old-fashioned, she seemed poised, elegant, and somehow almost angelic. In her arms, she held a very large basket that was shaped like an Asian wok. The shallow basket looked to be a few feet in diameter. Her basket held several bundles of straw-like cuttings, each wrapped with a band of cloth. This also struck me as a strange thing to do. Why would anyone bother bundling straw, wheat, or anything other grass product? Aside from these details, I was mostly struck by the young woman's graceful look and pose as she rested against the side of the building in the warm sunshine. I assumed she was playing the role of a slave woman and waiting for tourists to visit her building, upon which time she would present her talk on what it was like to have lived and worked as a slave at the Hermitage. I nudged my mother walking beside me, planning to point out the young woman and my expectation of role-playing characters on the mansion grounds when, still looking at the beautiful young woman, she suddenly vanished. In the blink of an eye, she was gone. My first thought was that the young woman must have stepped back and into a doorway that I hadn't noticed. But how could she have possibly moved so quickly? As I stepped off the path and began visually searching the side of the building for a doorway or any opening at all, my mother laughed a bit at my unusual behavior and asked what I was doing. I just felt confused and told her of the young woman who had been leaning against the building. Next, I spotted what appeared to be an employee wearing a tan-colored ranger-like uniform, standing up the path nearer the gardens. I went ahead of my parents and asked the employee if the Hermitage had personnel dressed in period clothing, playing the role of plantation workers from the 1800s. She was familiar with the practice but informed me that the Hermitage had no such personnel. Perhaps looking confused, the uniformed staffer then asked the reason for my question. I described what I had seen, She then chucked knowingly and quipped, "Oh yes, that happens here a lot." I didn't understand her comment and asked, "What happens here a lot?" She informed me that the Hermitage was considered one of the most haunted historical sites in the United States, and then asked me if we had been over to tour the log building where I had seen the young woman. My first thought was that the building itself hadn't looked particularly interesting to me, but simply responded that we had not. She then informed me that the building had been the slave quarters for President Jackson's many slaves. We went on to walk the gardens, visit President Jackson's tomb, and walk the outbuildings, including the slave quarters, but I saw no other apparitions. Strangely, as I look back on the experience, I seem to have simply moved on that day, never giving the entire experience much afterthought. Years later, while assisting a friend with his thesis paper at a Wisconsin University library, I ran across a book that was titled something like America's Most Haunted Places. Glancing through the table of contents, I quickly noticed that the Hermitage was listed among the haunted sites. Also, many years later, curious about the large wok-shaped basket and bundled straw cuttings, I discovered that both were common to the time period. The large wok-shaped baskets were designed to toss and then catch harvested seeds into the wind. The practice allowed the chaff of the seeds to be blown off before being used for food. The bundled straw-like stems that I had seen in the basket were cut and bundled by size during the busy harvest season. Later, when the slower winter months provided time, the bundled stems could then be pulled from storage and made into baskets and brooms. Considering that it is completely possible for anyone to experience realistic hallucinations, I particularly liked the detail of the unusual basket and bundles. If I were hallucinating, and it should be noted that I seldom use alcohol or any drugs, how could my mind fabricate something so specific and of which I had no prior knowledge? Also, on that day at the Hermitage, I had not been particularly engrossed in, or even all that impressed with the tour of the mansion itself or the experience overall. Simply put, I found the tour mildly interesting, and I appreciated its historical value, but had not been deep in thought about slavery, or any other aspect of the experience that would have precipitated delusional visions. To this day, what I remember most vividly and am still most impressed by when recalling the experience is just how palpable the serenity and peacefulness of the young slave woman had been. She seemed so angelic, leaning against the side of that building as the rain had given way to sunshine by the gardens. My emotional sense is that this young woman, after what most likely would have been a very difficult life, seemed to have found an incredible peace in her afterlife. I came away with some certainty that a physical body must have an equally whole though fainter spirit body that transcends physical death. In fact, the word afterlife strikes me as a misnomer in that we likely undergo a seamless transition into the spirit version of ourselves. As a crude example, water can exist as a liquid, solid as ice, as a fog or steam vapor, or as an invisible molecule in the air we breathe. Just because we can't see it does not mean that it is gone.